Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be together, even virtually, and to reaffirm our solidarity as a school. I want, as I have before, to congratulate you on how well you've adapted to this new method and how eager all of us are to launch the schedule that was announced yesterday for next week. But for your energy and your engagement and your goodwill, I am most grateful to both boys and to the faculty. Central to Roxbury Latin's mission and tradition is tending to the spiritual growth of our boys. The spiritual life can take many forms: a communion with nature, a foundation in organized religion, a commitment to service, a journey towards strong moral character. We hear frequently from speakers throughout the year about topics of faith, spirituality, and living with purpose. In October, during the high holy days of the Jewish calendar, we heard from Dr. Dalia Hochman of Gan Academy about the traditions of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. We've heard in the past from members of our community during the celebrations of Ramadan of the Muslim faith, or Diwali of the Hindu faith. Last evening, Jews began their celebration of Passover, and Christians look forward to the culmination of the most important period of their liturgical calendar, Holy Week, which began on Palm Sunday and will conclude this coming Sunday with the celebration of Easter. During the roughly 40 days of Lent, which precedes Holy Week, Christians are called to reflect, to account for themselves, and to give alms. During Lent, it is commonplace for people to give something up, to sacrifice, or to offer devotions and prayers. This preparation is seen as a worthy exercise as the faithful move toward becoming more reflective, more generous, more perfect human beings. Here with us this morning to talk about the meaning of Lent, of Holy Week, of Easter, and fundamental aspects of Christianity is Mr. Scot Landry. Mr. Landry, father of Christian in Class 1 and Dominic in Class 5, serves as co-leader for the Dynamic Parish Initiative at Dynamic Catholic, an organization providing resources to the Catholic Church in America. Prior to joining Dynamic Catholic, Mr. Landry served for several years in leadership and consulting positions for Catholic organizations, including the Archdiocese of Boston, where he served as Cabinet Secretary for Catholic Media and Cabinet Secretary for Institutional Advancement. He has committed his time and talents in St. Paul's Choir School, where he served as interim headmaster. He has also worked for Our Sunday Visitor, Catholic Voices USA, and as a strategy consultant and executive search professional for Catholic ministries. Prior to his church-related work, Mr. Landry's career focused on business operations, strategy, and marketing. Mr. Landry grew up in nearby Lowell, Mass, and attended Lowell Public Schools before matriculating at Harvard College and then Harvard Business School. He is a good man of deep faith, and we are delighted to have Mr. Landry with us. Please join me in welcoming to our virtual RL community this morning, Mr. Scot Landry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brennan. It's a joy to be with all of you today through Zoom, and I extend my wishes of a happy Passover and a happy Holy Week to everybody celebrating those great feasts. I'm a visual learner myself, so I thought it would be easier for us to go through my talk through utilizing some slides. So I'm going to share those slides with you now. So my talk today will be about the key events of Holy Week for sure, but Mr. Brennan invited me to share it through a personal lens on my own Christian journey. Every Christian, every person of any faith goes through their journey in a unique path, and I will share some of that path with you. Just for background, for Christians, this week, Holy Week, is the high point of the year. Easter, this Sunday, is the most important day of the year. And I believe, as I mentioned, each Christian believer is on that pilgrimage of discovery through life, which is all centered on Easter Sunday. And today I'll share my path with you all. For context, there's 2.1 billion Catholics, or billion Christians in the world today, and 1.3 billion Catholics. So my story is just one of 1.3 billion. In the US, 70% of our country claims Christian faith, and 20% of that is Catholic. Catholics are the second largest Christian denomination in the United States. to the evangelical Protestant believers. So in terms of numbers for the math people, that's about 230 million Christians in the US and 70 million Catholics. So as I'm going to take you through my journey that culminates in my study of what Holy Week is, that I'll share with you, there's been really 12 questions that have framed my journey. And the first one, as I thought back to what it was like for me when I was your age, 18 or 15 or 13, I experienced what I think was normative of at least kids that age when I was growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, similar probably to today. Isn't faith boring? And that was very much on my mind in high school. You can tell from some of my high school yearbook photos, I didn't look like I was the most engaged person in life. Here, you can see photos of me and my identical twin brother, Roger. I think my boys now are looking at some of these photos and saying, that's what Dad looked like when he had hair. It was full for a few more years after that before it started going away. So in high school, you know, I experienced living my Catholic faith. It's a little bit of boredom, but going through the motions. And over time, that going through the motions was replaced by a sense of awe and wonder about Christian belief. And I'll share what led me to conclude that it was about awe and wonder in a moment. For me, my life, my journey of faith really started to change in college. This is a photo from my college graduation. I'm there on the left. My roommate Ty and Jason are in the middle, and my brother Roger is far on the right. Ty was an agnostic at the time, and he is now a Christian. Jason was a devout Jewish young man, and now a Jewish young man. Ty is a sales and trader on Wall Street now, trading currencies. Jason is a professor of economics at the University of Texas at Austin. And my twin brother Roger is now a Catholic priest who represents Pope Francis at the United Nations. So as you can imagine, in college, the four of us had some great conversations about faith. And while I was there, I certainly experienced how faith in general and the Catholic Church, with our countercultural teachings on many things, were under attack. And that wasn't like my upbringing in Lowell, where even though not everybody was Catholic, it certainly felt like we were in a Catholic context going through high school. But it wasn't a Catholic context in college anymore. So that caused me to feel a duty to defend my faith, just like I would defend somebody who was challenging my family or saying bad things about my mom, just like all of you boys would. But to defend one's faith, to defend anything really that has an abstract nature to it or that is a robust thing, I needed to really know it first. So it caused me to want to explore the faith more and to overcome the doubts that I had about the beliefs. When I learned through a lot of my spiritual reading at the time that everyone doubts, but I learned to embrace the doubt. I learned to lean into it, to not be scared of it, to lean into it, and then to utilize it as fuel so that I would explore. And several Catholic saints throughout history have sayings similar to this, that true faith seeks understanding. You need to wrestle with it. You need to make it your own. And for me, at the time, I felt like I was going through this process of transitioning from the faith of my parents, and I was so glad that they passed on faith to me, but it was theirs, to my own understanding and living of my faith as an emerging young adult. And that process was critical to my life. And never would I have expected in high school or college where that exploration of my faith would lead me. 15 years after that graduation moment, after serving in several businesses that were successful, Cardinal O'Malley invited me to become part of his leadership team at the Archdiocese of Boston, along with another business leader, Jim McDonough, who's in this photo with me, was the CEO of the fourth largest bank in Massachusetts. So we came in and it was a little bit of a big deal that a two business guys that Cardinal Sean was turning to us to help with the recovery of the Archdiocese of Boston after the abuse crisis. And so I joined the Archdiocesan team to help raise money, not unlike Mr. Gooden does and several other members of the Roxbury Latin Development Office. But soon after joining there, and unexpectedly for me, I was asked to start representing Cardinal Sean and many, the 1.8 million Catholics in the Archdiocese in the media. I don't know that I would have taken the job if I knew that's what was going to be asked of me, because I just didn't feel like I knew my faith as well as so many other people. But one of the things I'll share later with you is my experience of faith is one where I try to say yes to invitations like this to talk about my faith to people like you. And then I began hosting radio programs and flipping it. So in this, I'm interviewing Cardinal O'Malley in Rome during the conclave that elected Pope Francis as our Pope in 2013. And while there, every journalist, TV journalist in Boston seemed to be there. So I was able to interview several of them. And this is Lisa Hughes, who I'm sure you've seen on WBZ Channel 4. So huge part of my exploration and what helped me overcome the boredom was an understanding of what the massive claims of Christianity are. So we believe some really bold things. We believe, among other things, that Jesus was conceived by the power of God in the womb of a virgin of about 13 years old. We believe Jesus did a lot of things that no other human being has ever done, that he walked on water and was able to calm the sea, that he was able to, with 5 fish and 2 loaves, feed over 5,000 families till they were all full. We also believed that he cured countless sick people, expunged a lot of demons, read people's minds and souls like he did for the women at the well. And then one of his biggest miracles was that he raised Lazarus from the dead, his friend Lazarus, 4 days after Lazarus had died, about a week before Jesus would die himself. And then the claims get even bigger than that. We believe that Jesus was scourged, beaten, and hammered to a cross in front of countless witnesses captured by historians. And that after he had breathed his last and lowered his head, he was pierced with a sword to prove he was actually dead by the Roman soldiers. Then he was taken down from the cross in the arms of his mom, anointed with oils like people were prepared for laying in a tomb. Then he was laid in a tomb, which was sealed with a huge stone. And because of the religious authorities wanting to just make sure Jesus' disciples wouldn't steal his body, it was guarded by Roman soldiers. And then 40 hours later, one of the biggest things we believe as Christians is that Jesus rose from the dead. And we've heard that as Christians. I heard that when I was your age, and it's like, okay, the term resurrection, okay, Jesus rose from the dead. But I never stopped and really thought about, what does that really mean? Think about that for a minute. He was dead. He was in the tomb. He had raised Lazarus from the dead a week earlier. Now he's raised from the dead. The tomb was empty. The stone was rolled away. Massive belief. And then we believe Jesus appeared to many people, Mary Magdalene, other women who visited the tomb, 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, as is pictured here. He appeared to the prime apostle, Simon Peter. And then he appeared to 10 of the 11 living apostles at that time, not including Thomas, who we now know as Doubting Thomas. And Thomas didn't believe the testimony of anybody. He said, unless I can put my fingers in his wounds, I'm not going to believe. So then Jesus appeared to all 11 now with Thomas, and Thomas realized that what the others had told him was true. He appeared to 7 disciples later on the Sea of Tiberias. Then he appeared to more than 500 people on a mountain in Galilee. He appeared privately to the apostle James, according to St. Paul. And then his last appearance was on the Ascension Day when he rose back to heaven 40 days after the resurrection. And he gave the apostles this great commission to tell the whole world about who he is. But then that isn't when the big claims stop. we also believe that Jesus' resurrection allows us to be resurrected on the last day, meaning we can spend eternity or infinity in heaven. And to just stop, and in my 20s, I stopped and I thought about that. It means that I'll be resurrected. It means that there's an eternal time, and that the time that we spend in this earth is just going to seem like a blip in the mind of eternity, just like the time that I and you spent in our own mom's wombs. We don't remember those times now. In the context of now I'm 50 years old, the 9-10 months that I spent in my mom's belly is just a blip. And that's how I believe our life on this earth is going to seem in light of eternity. And then the claims still continue. Beyond all that happened to Jesus, all that it opens up for us, we as Catholic Christians in particular, but Christians in general, believe Jesus is still present with us. And Pope Francis expresses the essence of the Christian faith this way, that Jesus Christ loves us, he gave his life to save us, and now he's living at our side every day, whenever we call on him, to enlighten, strengthen, and to free us. So what I would offer to you boys for this faith and for any faith, bold claims of faith are never boring when we enter into them. So then what are some of the other questions that influenced me? Thought about how I should evaluate and study my faith and any faith. And I learned over time that it's best to study a faith from the inside, not just what people say about it, but what people who live it say. You learn about a faith by observing its biggest saints, not its most notorious sinners. And in any faith, there are notorious sinners, but let's help find the saints. You learn and evaluate a faith by searching for its truth, its beauty, and its goodness, not by the ugly behavior or the things that are not true, beautiful, and good. And then through the credibility of the witnesses, those who have lived it. And using that gift of reason, everybody at Roxbury Latin has been gifted with great intellect. I believe, and the Catholic Church teaches, when God gives us that great intellect, we should use it to really wrestle with these ideas of faith and to take them as our own. Another key thing for me to engage in my faith was exploring different types of knowledge and what is needed to really, what type of knowledge is really needed to accept any faith. So this is the way I express it. Head knowledge is what we often study in school. It's about facts and senses, 2 + 2 = 4. And then there's the knowledge of the heart, the compassion that we express when we know we need to do something out of care or love for somebody else. And in the last 20, 30 years, there's been this whole study of heart knowledge, coined emotional intelligence, and its components of knowing yourself really well and being able to anticipate where others are coming from. And Roxbury Latin, they go through the admissions process, and I love it about RL, that they look for the type of person a boy is, his virtue and character, getting at this heart knowledge. And then for faith, and for the most important decisions of life, I term it soul knowledge. Where does that come from? Not the head, not the heart, but you feel it in your gut sometimes, being called to whatever vocation God has given you in life. And I believe your wonderful teachers at Roxbury Latin, they've not only taken the job of a teacher to get paid for the paycheck, they've done it because they felt called to help you all grow to be the person you've been created to be. And when I think of some of the biggest decisions of my life, to marry my wife, Jimena, to know that she was the right person for me, that is this knowledge that's deep in my soul that I feel in this gut. So to really, for me to appreciate my faith, I had to learn to accept that not everything is visible, that there's this whole invisible world that is not observable to the senses. So then the next thing that I had to get through is, what are the bigger questions that framed my whole journey of Christian faith? And the first 3 almost had nothing to do with the Christian faith, but it was very important for me to go through it. I had to ask, who am I? What's my purpose in life? Who do I feel called to be? If tomorrow was my last day, what would I want people who know me to think about me? And that led me to these next 2 questions. What matters most and what matters least in life? And, there are different horizons to ask those questions of what matters most and what matters least. Right now, what matters most? It might be, doing well in the next test, or what matters most in this chapter of my life. For you, that might be ending your high school years at Roxbury Latin in the best possible way, or in the context of your life. And then the one that blew my mind in my 20s was, what matters most in the context of eternity, that I could live forever, that's open for me. And then for Christians, the key question that I faced in my 20s is, who do I say that Jesus is? And the society has a lot to say about Jesus. He's perhaps the most discussed person that's ever lived. And who do some people say that Jesus is? Some say that he's a great teacher, and others say he's a great prophet. And others sometimes want to reduce Jesus to just being a nice guy. Not even the nicest guy, but a nice guy. But Jesus was very clear on who he was saying that he believed that he would be. And in the scriptures, in so many ways, he said directly and indirectly that he was God, that he was the Son of Man. That's the title that he used most for himself, 80 times. And that's the fulfillment, we believe as Christians, of what was in the Old Testament or the Jewish scriptures about the coming Messiah, that Jesus was saying that he was the coming Messiah. And for that, many of the religious figures of the time said that Jesus was blaspheming, and that was the charge that led to his death. So Jesus says that he's the Son of God, the Messiah. Historians have documented that Jesus was a real person and that he was executed for blasphemy. So given what Jesus says about himself, as Christians, certainly, we're called to say, who do we say that Jesus is? And C.S. Lewis, who many of you would know from the Chronicles of Narnia, in one of his other books, Mere Christianity, he said, we really have, as Christians, three options. Jesus is either a liar, he was making up what he said or who he claimed he was, or he was a lunatic, that he was crazy, and he actually believed that he was the Messiah, the Son of God, but he wasn't, because he was crazy, or that we need to accept him as Lord. And that had a lot to do with my journey in my 20s. So ultimately, who do I say that Jesus is? For me, through my prayer, study, observation, and discussion in those young adult years for me, I came to believe in my gut that all these massive claims were true. And then when I came to that conclusion, then I asked myself this question: if I believe it's all true, how should it impact my life? And for me, it's made me say yes more and more, to make myself available to serve in whatever way, including giving a talk about my faith to the Roxbury Latin community. So now I'd like to transition to Holy Week quickly. We believe as Christians, Holy Week happened 1987 years ago. We have a precise time in 33 AD. It began with Palm Sunday, where Jesus came up to Jerusalem to prepare for the Passover, and he was accepted by some as he entered the gates with palm branches like a king, because they believed he was the Messiah, and he was ushering in a new time for God's kingdom. It was a confused time. Not every believer at that time, thought the same things, but at least some were doing it, which is what Palm Sunday was. And then his disciples prepared for the Passover meal, which we remember as Christians on Holy Thursday with the Last Supper. And some of these images will be from some of the more popular movies about his life. This is from the Passion of the Christ. And that at that Holy Thursday, that Jesus offered the first Mass, we believe as Catholics, that he offered his body and blood for us, and that if we consume that when we come to Mass, then we partake of this new covenant that he was instituting with us, the promise, the deep promise that God is making to us, and that we're accepting and promising him back, that we would do our best to live our life and our faith. And then on Holy Thursday, Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, and they were tremendously confused by that. And he showed people how to serve, how to lead, as he was forming the apostles that would take his teaching to the rest of the world. And then on Good Friday, many things happened. We believe the first the Good Friday was on April 3rd of 33 AD. He was scourged at the pillar and beaten. He went through several trials of very different tribunes. Then he carried his cross, the main beam of the cross, the horizontal beam, through the streets of Jerusalem, ending on the hill of Golgotha there, where we believe he hung on the cross for 3 hours from noon to 3, and he died just about 3 p.m. that time. And then on Resurrection Sunday, 40 hours later, the tomb was empty, that Jesus had risen from the dead. So that's what we believe happened in the original Holy Week. Today, in any church, and no churches are open right now for the Catholic Church throughout the United States, but every Palm Sunday until this one in my life, we would get together, we would receive the palms, we would read the readings of Jesus's triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and then many people would take those palms and turn them into crosses, as you can see here. And then on Holy Thursday, we remember the feet washing, and this is a shot of Cardinal Sean O'Malley at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Boston, washing the feet of folks a few years ago on Holy Thursday. And we're reminded on Holy Thursday that part of our mission as Catholics is to serve. And globally, today and for many centuries, no organization has clothed more people, cared for more sick people, fed more people, or educated more people than the Catholic Church. And that's something I'm personally very proud of as a Catholic. Holy Thursday, we remember that first Mass, the institution of the Eucharist, and it's always a Mass on Holy Thursday. Then as we move to Good Friday the next day, one of the things that's most memorable for us as Catholics is the veneration of the cross, where we realize this cross that was a symbol of torture and of the worst way to die about 2,000 years ago. It became the sign of God's love for us and our redemption and our opportunity to be in heaven for eternity. So we venerate the cross either by kissing our fingers and touching the cross, or kissing part of the cross. It's the only time we really do that as a community of Catholics each year. And then we celebrate Easter. We start at the vigil with the ceremony of light, a big bonfire outside of church, where the priest, or in this case, Cardinal Sean, blesses the Easter candle and then processes it in, where everybody has a candle in a dark church, and it's beautiful if you've never been. Then on Easter, we welcome new people who are converting to Catholicism with their baptism, with the reception of the Eucharist, and then for all those who will be confirmed as Catholics, and that Cardinal Sean then seals them with oil on their head later on. So Easter is one of the biggest gatherings of our Catholic community. Here you can see nearly 2,000 people at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. So that's Easter today. A couple more quick questions of how my faith journey ended up with me speaking to you today. We believe the resurrection is central to the Christian faith. We believe it because it reveals God the Father's love for us in that new covenant. It reveals to us who Jesus truly is, that he was that Lamb of God who offered himself for us. And it makes us see in a new way everything Jesus did and said prior to his death and resurrection. And then what Easter, the resurrection, reveals and means for us, principally that the God who loves us wants us to be with him eternally in heaven. And why do we believe what we believe as Christians? Because of the appearances of Jesus and many subsequent miracles, because what Jesus taught before his death and resurrection is true, and it was seen in a new light. And the credibility of those first witnesses, no Christian today, not any of those 2 billion Christians, would be practicing the Christian faith if 11 of those first 12 apostles weren't willing to lay down their life for it. 11 of those 12 were martyred for the faith. And then the credibility of all the witnesses throughout time, the testimony over these 1987 years, including today. And what do I hope that this talk provokes in you, each boy, each student at Roxbury Latin? I hope that It provokes in you that you ponder the big mysteries of life and the claims of whatever your faith is. It's important to enter into that and to wrestle with it and use your intellectual gifts to make your faith your own. And I really hope you reflect on these questions earlier than I did. Who am I? What's my purpose? What matters most in my life and what matters least? And that when you study your own faith or whether you explore other faiths, that you try to do it from the inside and seek faith, the truth, the beauty, and the goodness of each faith. Have one bonus question for you Catholics in particular, now that this is going to be a Holy Week like no other, that we need to do it through screens, either televisions or computer screens. What would I recommend if you wanted to participate in Good Friday, Holy Thursday, and Easter services at home? My recommendation to you is to watch Father Mike Schmitz. He's a Catholic college minister, campus minister in Minnesota. He's very funny in the way that he talks about the faith, and he's really good at explaining the faith to boys your age. And you can find that through the Ascension Presents YouTube channel, Father Mike Schmitz. So now I'd like to open it up for questions. Miss Berg, I believe, is going to read your questions and then give them to me.
All right, we have two questions, Mr. Landry. The first one is from Senior Hari Narayanan, and he's asking, do Christians view Jesus as a human being with whom they have a personal relationship? That is to say, do they view him as a person with flaws and vices in addition to his noble qualities?
Thanks, Hari. That's an awesome question. So first, we believe two things about Jesus as Christians. We believe that he was fully divine and fully man, not 50-50, but 100% on those things. And that's a mystery. We believe, how can that be? Well, if we believe God created the world and created us as human beings, that if he wanted to make himself 100, he could. So that's that part of what we believe, that he was fully human. We believe that Jesus experienced all the emotions that we all experience. He was fully human. If, he was a carpenter, if he hit his thumb with a hammer, we believe that Jesus probably expressed some things in anger or things like that. But we don't think he ever went as far as sinning. And what we mean by that is he never chose to do something knowing that God the Father would want him to do something else. So he never knew the right thing to do and did the opposite. And that's essentially what we mean as Catholic Christians of sin, choosing an action that distances us from God or who God wants us most to be. So we never believe that Jesus sinned, but we believe he went through all the human emotions. It's very clear in sacred scripture, the Christian Bible, that he expressed his anger several times. He went into the Jewish temple and he overturned the tables in one famous example because he was upset that people were taking this house of God and turning it into a marketplace. So he showed his emotion and his anger in that way. And then we saw the real human emotion when he lost one of his best friends, Lazarus. Now, Jesus went to raise Lazarus from the dead, knowing that God the Father would give him that power to do it. But at a human level, he grieved the same way that everybody else was grieving for his friend Lazarus. So he experienced all of our human emotions, but we don't believe he ever took it to the point where those negative emotions became sinful.
All right, the second question is from Dr. Wilson, and it has two parts. Do you believe that a person who models his or her life on the actions and ethics of Jesus, but does not accept many of the, quote, massive claims that you summarize, can accurately be viewed as Christian? And then the second part, furthermore, how do contemporary Catholics view those who believe in God and strive to live righteous lives, but deny Christ's divinity, like Jews, Muslims, and Unitarian Christians?
Yeah. So those are some other big questions. We could spend a lot of time wrestling with those, and I love the questions. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So first, what do Catholic Christians in particular believe about folks that call themselves Catholic or Christian, but don't necessarily believe everything that I've outlined as some of the massive teachings that are contained in our creed or our statement of beliefs? or perhaps even live the faith, extremely well. Sometimes there are Christians that believe all of those things, but then they act in a way that to all of us wouldn't seem like good or true or beautiful. So in general, anybody who believes in their heart that Jesus is God and who wants to follow Jesus's teaching the best that they can, the Catholic Church would accept everybody as being on a different stage in that journey of knowledge and this, knowledge and belief, right? And in many ways, there's never been a perfect Christian after the time of Jesus. So whether people don't believe everything fully or live it fully, we're all on that journey to God. What the Catholic Church would invite everybody to do is to enter into that disagreement, enter into those moments of doubt, and really explore what the Catholic Church teaches and why. So I find in our own era that Catholic beliefs in many aspects of the way we live our lives are countercultural. There's a lot of people that know what the Catholic Church teaches or think they know what the Catholic Church teaches, and they disagree with it. But even among many Catholic friends that I have, they've never really dove in and studied why the Catholic Church teaches what it does or why the Christian faith believes what it does about those things. So for anybody that has doubts, for anybody that has disagreements, I go back to what I had said on one of those earlier slides, that we can believe Jesus, who he is for us as faith, but then we want to transition that faith into a deeper understanding by wrestling with it and not just stopping at, okay, I know the Catholic Church teaches that and I disagree with it, but not really exploring the deeper teachings. And it's the same thing in terms of the way we live our faith as Catholics and Christians, that we can believe all the right things, quote unquote, but then we don't put it into practice. And we need to be open to saying, am I living my faith? Not just my beliefs. Am I living my faith in the way that God calls me to live? And Catholics and Christians are called beyond belief to try to transform the world in a way that makes human dignity so important. If we see suffering, we're meant to be the person that is that Good Samaritan that walks and meets that person and helps, to make sure that people are educated, to make sure that prisoners are visited, to make sure that the hungry and the thirsty have something to eat and drink. So it's not just believing the right things, it's about living the right things. And there's so much beauty in the way we can all live and grow in the faith. And I would just encourage anybody who is Catholic or Christian who said, I'm not sure that I believe all those massive claims, or maybe I've studied some of them and they're not resonating with me, to just continue in your life to explore those teachings and to wrestle with them yourself. And one of the ways that it was helpful for me is I would make the prayer to God and say, God, I believe this, but I don't believe it fully. If this is true, please help me believe everything you want me to know and believe, and then to live this teaching. And I believe God answered my prayers. And in my own life of faith, anytime I've made that prayer to help me grow in faith, I believe God has answered it for me. Doesn't always answer my prayers if I say, I'd like the Red Sox to win the World Series every year, or if somebody that I know is ill and I pray for a cure. He doesn't always answer those prayers, but he has always answered the prayers for me when I've wanted to learn more about my faith.
All right, Mr. Landry, we have about 5 minutes left, so I think we have time for these last two questions. This one is from sophomore Nick Rosidi, and his question is, what is your analysis of the statement that stories in Christian texts are representative and figurative?
Okay, thank you, Nick. So the way sacred scripture was written, it has many different genres to it. So some of the genres are much more figurative and others are much more literal. So the key teachings about Jesus contained in this, what we call the synoptic gospels, more like a history, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that those we take much more literally. The Gospel of John connects the dots in a much more spiritual or theological way. But some of the Old Testament readings we recognize were written in different forms of writing that were meant to convey the truths that God wanted to convey. But we don't take every book in sacred scripture literally.
Okay, the next question is from Jake Carroll, and it is, do you feel like someone who's in high school has the maturity and or wisdom to be able to confidently put their faith in something as large and as important as religion? Or is just the act of thinking about these larger questions enough?
Thanks, Jake. Another awesome question. I certainly wasn't ready in high school to comprehend a lot of this massive stuff. I would say, as I tell my own boys, they're much smarter than me. I would have never gotten into Roxbury Latin, I think, in high school. So some of these things might be the types of questions that boys at Roxbury Latin, when they get to junior, senior year at Roxbury Latin, or they move on to college, will wrestle with in college the same way that I did. For some of you boys, it might start earlier, but it's okay to just say, you know, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready for those big, to wrestle with those very big ideas. You know, I have enough on my plate in life. What I was hoping to do in this presentation is to address the main challenge that I felt when I was your age, which was faith it seemed boring. There just seemed to be these teachings that were out there, these big words that I never really wrestled with and embraced. And my life totally changed for the better when I started to wrestle with them. So if you're ready to start wrestling with them, I say go. If you're not ready yet, that's okay. I just hope that some of these ideas planted some seeds for when you are ready to wrestle with either the Christian faith or whatever faith that you have, if you have a faith. There are big questions in every faith. There's goodness, truth, and beauty in every faith. And I encourage you to try to get to the core of that true, everything that's true, good, and beautiful in your own faith. Before I turn it back to Ms. Berg and to Mr. Brennan, wanted to thank you all for your attention today. I can't see you, but the questions are representative of how engaged you all were. And I wish those who practice a Jewish faith, again, a happy Passover. And for every Christian who is watching the broadcast today, happy Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday.
So, Mr. Landry, there were a couple other questions that came in at the end. We're almost out of time, but what I'll do is connect you with these two boys over email so that you can perhaps get in touch with them and answer their questions directly. And I know that Mr. Brennan has a few remarks just to close us out. So thank you very much, Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Ms. Berg.
Mr. Landry, thank you so much for being with us. Your testimony and your example are compelling. And the only advice I would add, which underscores something you said already, is that all of us need to either begin to ask the big questions or to continue to ask the big questions and to seek the answers to those questions. This, for many of us, is a lifelong pursuit, as it should be, as we seek to become more perfect in our relationships and in the lives that we lead. I believe there's nothing more important than that. So I'm especially grateful for your being here today, and the fact that we have these opportunities as staples of the Roxbury Latin diet. That said, I wish people who are commemorating holidays or celebrating holidays this weekend all the best. And to the rest of you, I hope the rest of the week is productive. I know that you're looking forward to the new schedule next week. And in the meantime, have a good end of the week and a great weekend. Thanks very much.